Ask the Podcast Coach for July 30th, 2022.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's the sound of Jim hitting his mic as he's dancing. It's Saturday morning. It's that music that means it's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, and joining me right over there, he's a dancing fool. He's a dancing machine. He's watch him get down, watch him get down. What was that one? That was, I know it's the Jacksons.
I thought you were going into Dancing Queen for a while.
No.
Okay.
That's Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv.
Greetings, Dave.
Jim.
Happy Saturday morning to you. Yeah, I got a little too excited about dancing this morning and just smacked my mic. So that does one of the casualties of...
That sounds dirty. It does. Where's Jim? He's in his room smacking his mic. It's like, holy cow. We've started in a very weird
Ooh, a little
direction
dark,
this morning.
little dark and dirty this morning. Sorry. If your kids are listening, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we didn't say anything wrong. Yeah, exactly.
What are they talking about, Daddy? Smacking his mic.
Yeah. Well, you know what? If you smack your mic enough, you work up a lot of sweat.
Oh boy, let's.
Yeah, let's not. It might make you thirsty. I'm trying to get us back on track.
let's do the coffee pour.
That coffee pour, of course, is brought to you by the one and only Mark over at podcastbranding.co. I know I say this every time. I was working with something, pulled up the School of Podcasting logo, and I went, man, I think that thing looks cool. And if you need a whole website, if you need artwork, if you need some sort of lead magnet, anything that you want to look good, go over to Mark at podcastbranding.co. Not only is he an award-winning graphic artist, but he's also a podcaster. So he kind of gets the whole internet radio thing. You don't have to explain that to him. And he's actually going to sit down with you one-on-one to make sure that your logo, let's say you're doing artwork, is going to match the show. He's going to listen to the show. He's going to find out what your goals are and just really take the time to do it right. And so that you'll be like me. You'll be like years later going, man, I love my artwork. So check it out. If you need anything to look good, because they see you before they hear you, go over and check out Mark at podcastbranding.co.
So good. Big thanks to our friend Dan Lefebvre over there at Based on a True Story Podcast at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. Dave, episode 206, he covers Jurassic Park and Jurassic World. Was that based on a true story? Dan, what are you doing over there? No, just kidding.
Yes.
So it's like, did that really happen? Or is it gonna happen?
Yeah.
Anyways, if you want to find out, that is posted up at episode 206, based on a true story podcast.com. Thanks, Dan.
Seeing that, you did a good job, because I want to go, wait, I got to go hear that now, because what the heck? So I'm going to take this time to click start now. And it's always weird. I'm starting our Twitter space, which is always very odd, because the minute I start it, the first thing it does is mute the microphone.
Yeah, it mutes you.
That's confusing. But
and we kind of made Dave kind of made a technical decision. Go ahead and let Twitter Spaces out of the beginning of the show so that they're not kind of coming into that. I think your reasoning was they're not as like, they don't come every week. Like this is kind of an outreach mechanism for this, and maybe doing our opening. Maybe not. I mean, this morning it was kind of interesting. Maybe a few would stick around to hear us smack our mics.
Well, it's one of those things where I'm sure there's a name for this, because like last week we had a few people show up and we're doing the coffee pour and the whole 9 yards, and I saw 2 of them leave, and I was like, so you immediately associate with, oh, they don't like, a minute and a half of ads at the beginning, which in theory it might just be they found a room, clicked on it, and went, oh yeah, this isn't, it has nothing to do with the content. They're just
right.
They're not talking about knitting or coaching or whatever, so who knows? But at any rate, it's live now. So
welcome.
Oh,
Twitter
here we
Spaces.
go. We have an answer from Dan. Jack Horner was the paleontology consultant for all those movies. So we talked about dinosaurs. There you go. That's what that's about.
Dinosaurs were real. That they were a real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are a true story.
Dave, is that other Dave Jacks on YouTube also you? Learn to podcast. It says Cleveland, Ohio. That means I haven't updated that. But yeah, if it's Dave, well, I can't even say that. Most of I know 5 Dave Jacksons in Akron, Ohio. So it's not an uncommon name. But yeah, learn to podcast on YouTube. Or if you just go to youtube.com, I believe I'm David Jackson, like / David Jackson on YouTube. But I'm trying to do a video a week. And it's weird because like a 4-minute video takes me an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I'm adding little words that pop in and editing it and blah, 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 and that whole 9 yards. So
I think you used to be able to, 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, you could just create anything, throw it on YouTube and, kind of be popular. I think now you really need to, you got to really put a little more effort into. Listen, every once in a while you're going to do something crazy and you're just going to make a video and it's, it may get picked up because it's just for whatever. But I think in a lot of cases today, folks are looking for production value. It's probably the reason like this doesn't do well. Talking heads on YouTube, and I say that, and yet, a podcast like Critical Role, which is just talking heads, has millions of people watching it. So I say that I guess I'm trying to make an excuse for us why we don't get more on YouTube. But I think it does take a little more production value. And Critical Role does a nice job of different camera angles and setting some things up. And they've got a pretty rabid audience that follows them. So I think it does take a little more production value.
Well, kind of like my YouTube guru is Tim Schmoyer, who does video creators. Really nice guy. And I think it was him that sent out a thing that YouTube sent out. Like, here's the top 10 questions that YouTubers ask. And they talk about the importance of your title and your artwork. And again, we go back to they see you before they hear you. And those are the things for me, unfortunately, that's like the last thing I do. So I'm tired. I just want this up. And so you kind of get into that, that'll do kind of situation. And, but I've always considered this audio first, and whatever I get on YouTube is gravy, and we kind of go from there. And,
well, those thumbnails too, I hate seeing the ones that are provocative. You can see, like, wow, they really worked. The video, I follow all these DIY or these homesteaders, that are doing this stuff, and they're just building things, right? They're out in the country building things. Yet the thumbnail is a very provocative, short shorts or tight shirts or stuff like that. And then there's what the girls do too. So there's, there's like, you see that and you go, oh, thank you.
A little late, but
thank you. It's all right. It was good. Good timing. I see those and I get a little disappointed right before I click on it to go.
How about the big eyes, big mouth? Every screenshot has somebody going. It's like, okay, that's gonna make me click. Yeah,
it must work in some. I mean, some of that must. Well, I know the provocative stuff works for sure. Yeah, but it just does. Yeah. Marv, I'm sorry. Sorry that I wasn't. I was referring to you, but I didn't mean it. So I just get a little disappointed that well, first of all, I don't have a co-host that looks like that. I mean, if I put you in short shorts, Dave, nobody would, nobody's going to come and see that, or me. Same.
Yeah, that's.
So I get a little disappointed. We have to do. You kind of have to do. I don't want to say you have to, but
it doesn't hurt. I guess is the
exactly. Yeah. It's a little disappointing.
Well, I was listening to it's weird because it's summer, and Todd Cochran made a good point on the New Media Show. He goes, "This is really one of the first summers in a while that people kind of feel a little more comfortable going out and about. You can actually fly places. You don't have to wear 15 masks. So your numbers may see a dip. I haven't really checked mine to do that, but it's interesting because on one hand, I forget who. What is Megaphone just put out a thing about how, things are going up. Spotify just put out a report that explained how they had growth in listeners. They're still losing, like, I think it was 146 million. How do you lose 146 million dollars in your company and like not go out of business? That always makes me scratch my head. But it's one of those things where I'm going to be interesting to see, because you've kind of got two trains of thought. You got a lot of people working on advertising, making it easy to add advertising to your show. And I'm not anti-advertising, but I am anti it doesn't match the show advertising, and anti way too many ads advertising, which I think is where we're heading. I've started doing something just for giggles. When I go into my kitchen, I ask the woman in the tube from Amazon to play a radio station, and I am amazed at how many times it's a commercial. I've heard so many commercials for Shady Rays. If you break your sunglasses, they'll send you a new one. Doesn't matter how they were broken or if you lost them. Shady, it's like, okay. So if I'm going to buy, it's worked. I remembered their brand, but I just hope that podcasting doesn't turn into that. And then on the other side, you've got this whole value for value thing, the podcasting 2.0, new podcast apps. This show is equipped. If you want to send us a boost, feel free to do that. And I talking to one of the developers, because they're adding all this new capability to the RSS feed. And then the one guy's like, yeah, we just need people to adopt it. Because like when you hear Amazon's like, oh, we're going to transcribe our shows now. And you're like, oh, cool, because we've already made the technology. You just put this tag in and put the link to your transcription and you're done. And instead, Amazon built their own thing. And you're like, eh. And that's the thing where I'm like, I remember when Todd built something by Blueberry I forget what even the tag was. And it was literally a line of code that it was the, subscribe via email or something like that Todd made. And it was just a little bit of code that you had to put in your app. And he got some adoption, but nothing like he wanted. And so when I hear people start saying, yeah, we just need more adoption, there is a part of me that like puckers up. Like, I'm just like, that may not, I've seen that not work in the future, but I'm hoping, and that's the whole idea of the value for value, the new podcast apps, that if we get enough people going around the big dogs, that the big dogs will then go, well, we need to adopt what all these kind of independent people are doing. So.
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, they're in it for their best interest, right? Obviously, and they're gonna wall it in a way that gets them the most power and the most protection and the ability to get the stats that they need. They really don't want anybody else doing it. They would prefer they could just control it all. I mean, that's the nature of the beast on that. So I don't know. There's a lot of talk about trying to get them to work with the open RSS standard stuff. They're not going to do it. I mean, Apple did it begrudgingly in its day, just because because they did, and I don't think they have a vision at Apple for podcasting. I think they know they want to do it. They've got a team of four folks who are probably the only ones paying attention to the space. But I think if we're hoping that the big players in this, and it's really just Spotify, right? Is there, who else, Dave? Who else is in this space besides Spotify that wants to create their own walled garden? Can.
Nobody yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Apple's trying a little with their subscription thing, but I still am amazed, because somebody asked me about that and they said, what do you think about that? I said, well, they're going to take 30%. You get zero information about your customer, because they're not your customer. They're Apple's customer and you're the product. And I said, oh, and by the way, 70% of Europe listens on an Android phone,
right,
and there is no Apple app. I go, so, other than that, it's great, because they were all in. I'm like, well, go ahead. I go, but you're going to need some sort of Android, whether that be Glow.fm or Supercast or Patreon or whatever. But if you're going to be selling, a premium version of this, Apple's not a great, it's a great solution that I'm sure it's easy with Apple Pay and everybody's already got their ID. But if you're on an Android, you're kind of screwed. So
Well,
You need to.
Apple has everything they need except vision. Like they cannot figure out if they want to be in the space or they don't want to be in the space. I just get a feeling. Listen, when you sell 8 billion iPhones a quarter, and
Yeah.
you're literally taking a bath in money, all the time. I mean, their profits are larger than most countries' GDPs, right?
Yeah.
So they can't. There's not enough in it for them to pay
Right.
attention. They're just too big. Google's in the same boat, right? They're too big to care about it. You start like, how much is that going to make? And
Yeah.
then the executive team kind of looks at the podcasting guys and go, well, just keep going. But we're not really gonna we don't really care. So listen, Apple doesn't care. Google doesn't care. There's maybe Amazon with Audible that has something
Mhm.
in this, right? But they certainly haven't gotten aggressive about it. I mean, it's available. You can do it. They're not advertising for it that much. Listen, what's the iHeartMedia?
Yeah.
iHeartMedia does more advertising than Audible for
Yeah.
podcasters. I
Yeah.
mean,
They
they are
do.
number one, right? So, so you start looking around and you're like, well, it's just Spotify. That's really
Yeah.
the only big boy that's out there at the moment.
And I've always thought it was weird because for a while, Apple had Google audio ads. It was basically AdSense for audio. They tried that for a little while and it was like remnant sale basically. And then, fast forward 5 years later, they come up with Google Podcasts. I was always surprised that they didn't come up with a way that if you wanted to, you could opt in on Google Podcasts to run ads in between episodes or something like that. And they never put that together. I really wish I I'm tempted to, but I'm not, remove the Spotify link on my website for subscription. I would much rather have people subscribe in Google Podcasts because you get to see keywords of what people searched in to find your show. And the stuff, granted, I can see how far people listened. I can do that in Google Podcast. I can see that a lot of my audience listens to Ed Sheeran. Okay, I can't do that in Google Podcasts, and I can get demographic data in Spotify. But I
Yeah,
just
but
wish
you
Google
risk
Podcasts.
losing them. Like, what if you get there
Yeah,
and they're like, no, I'm because it's a walled garden and people have made
yeah,
investments into their playlists that they're like, you're not in Spotify. I get this question all the time on the Gallup side of things. I'll be like, oh, hey, come listen to the new Clifton Strengths podcast. Are you in Spotify? I mean, that's the very first question they ask.
yeah,
I'm like, can you not search? Of course we're in Spotify. Like, just go out there
yeah,
and search Clifton Strengths. But
yeah.
it is those listeners, if you do remove it, you run the risk of them getting there and
Well,
not finding it, and then
yet.
they quit.
Well, let me rephrase.
Okay.
Not remove it from Spotify, but when you go to
No.
subscribe to
Right.
the show,
Right. No, I understand what
in
you're
other words,
saying.
they'd have to search. But that would be,
Yeah.
for the record, that would be a really dumb move because it is the number 2 app. So it's like,
Yeah.
that's not.
No, for
You know,
sure. Yeah, I think that's a dumb move.
um,
Just because you don't want to you don't want to introduce. I mean, there's tons of Spotify listeners. I think we're going to have to learn to play with Spotify. This is the thing. I think we're at a breaking point right now where some industry experts are just trying to do everything they can to ignore them. I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to put my podcast on Spotify, or I'm not going to play their games or whatever, right? Well, I think you have to. This had been like 10 years ago saying, well, I'm not going to do Apple, right? Who needs an Apple RSS feed, right? Or
right.
who needs to be in iTunes? Who needs to be in iTunes? I don't think you could say that. And I don't think you can say that about Spotify today. We have to figure out ways. You're going to have to, because there's just a gajillion listeners over there that you don't want to miss.
Well, it's interesting because I'm updating some of the tutorials for the School of Podcasting, and Apple, Google, Stitcher, TuneIn are the 4 that you have to go to their website to submit. And if everybody becomes a walled garden, you're going to have to do that to every app that you want to be in.
Yeah.
and I was like, man, that would just make publishing an episode such a pain.
But I do that today. I mean, and it doesn't take long.
Yeah.
It doesn't take long. It's, after I publish, I use Raindrop for my, my shortcuts. You can choose. I have a folder called podcast submit sites. Click them and it opens them all. And then you just go one by one, and I do it while I'm listening to Cigar Authority. And then 15, 20 minutes later, they're all done, right? Copy and paste stuff in. So that's not for most podcasters, that's actually the easy part. The hard show notes are harder than that.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
So
they are.
Yeah.
It'll be fun to watch any way you
yeah, we just can't avoid them. I don't think we can avoid Spotify. They're going to continue to be their leader, and they actually care, because this is like Google doesn't care and Apple doesn't care. Google could care less if they're successful in podcasting. They're not going to put that much effort into it. Where with Spotify, they're very, very interested in turning this into making money, and they need to, so they're motivated.
Yeah, Coach Dave is bringing up Rumble Studio. This is a cool little tool. Let me bring this up here real quick. It's very much like voice form. And if people want, I'll put this in the chat so we can see what this looks like. What it does is, let me share my screen here. It's from AppSumo. So it's one of those things where if you've never played with AppSumo, it's companies that are kind of brand new and they're trying to grow their audience quickly. But if I said I want to do a new interview, I can say, I'll just do one from scratch. So I'll say blank and create. And then it's just a matter of, what do you want to add? An audio request, text, image, video, slider request, number request. And you just drag and drop. So if I say, hey, I want an audio request, and then I can record my little question. The idea is it's asynchronous interviews. So I could say, I'm using it for the question of the month. If you want to see it in action, go to schoolofpodcasting.com/question. And I get it, especially if I'm interviewing somebody that's not in my time zone, that I could say, tell me about a time when you thought such and such. And then they can record their answer, or if they've already recorded it, they can upload it. And the whole point is it's an asynchronous interview. And there's a part of me that just goes, no. Like, that's, to me, part of the interview process is the relationship building. And you've kind of just taken that out of it. And once you're done with this, if we go back to here, what I just put in the chat room is you end up with a link. And then if I forget how I go into this to edit it. But you end up, yes, I want to edit this. Update, edit your interview. Can you tell I've just got this? I know somewhere in here I can click on this. And yeah, so here's the actual interview. Here's where I can share it. So I have like QR codes and links and things like that. And then I see the answers. So right now I have one. So if somebody wants to answer this would be great. And the idea is when I click on this, I can actually see, here's my question, which was just like, what's your name? It's just me playing with it. And then I can see this person's answer. Now, if I click on these, you can't hear them. But the idea is with this mix tool, I could basically take me asking the question and them answering the question and stitch it together into a podcast. And that's another one where I go, I'm not sure about that. That could, okay, maybe. But it's, so for me, I don't see it as a tool to do one-on-one interviews. I see it as a great tool to do kind of ask your audience kind of stuff. That I could see. And I haven't had enough people, like I say, I put a link in the show notes there if you want to go click on this. So right now I have one reply, and it's just not really what I would call a great thing, but I want to say it's $59 for
limited time.
Yeah, limited time only.
Surprised they don't have a timer underneath it. You can get it for the next 7 hours. Then refresh it in 7 hours again.
Oh, that's the one thing that almost got me sued, is the one, I forget the company that had a thing where it's like, it was down to the wire, and I bought it, and I went the next day, and the timer had reset, and I was like, "These guys are liars," and blah blah. And they were like,
Then they
"Yeah,
said, "Hey, stop calling us that."
yeah." They're like, "That's liable," and I'm like, "Well, it's true." Audello, thank you, Daniel. Yeah.
Oh, those were the
So,
days.
so it's an interesting tool. I could see it's one of those where I'm like, all right. I know I tried one called VoiceForm, which was interesting because I went back and looked at VoiceForm, and it's much more polished now than when I first bought it. And that's probably going to be the same thing here with Rumble Studio, because I remember people were answering questions on Audio Form. I think that was the name of it. And I was having a hard time getting them out. And I was like, well, that's kind of the whole purpose of, a true database is not how you put the information in. That's definitely important, but it's also how easy is it to get the information out. And I was having a hard time, and in some cases it was garbling the audio. And so that was literally months, if not years ago. So voice form could be quite much improved now than this. So we'll see. It's just to me, the idea of an asynchronous interview just was like, well, on one hand, kudos, thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
But it really, there was a part of me that I was like, But I could see it. People do this with blogs where they will send, like, here are 5 questions about, what do you wish you would have known when you first started blah, blah, blah. And then they'll send it to the 5 top people that do blah, blah, blah. And they're like, hey, we're doing this article, yada, yada, yada. We'll quote you and link to you. And then, of course, what they want them to do is they want those top 5 people to then promote the article when it comes out. I could kind of see it for something like that. Like, I'd like to do, I'm interviewing Steve Stewart. I think it's today on, I have people that are always asking me, what about editing? Should I get into editing? Is that a good business? And I thought this would be a cool use of that, where I could come up with 3 or 4 questions and just send it to a bunch of editors and then combine them into a podcast. I did an episode once on podcast networks, and I interviewed Daniel because he had a network at the time, and Glenn and a couple other people, the guy from the Trek network, which is interesting because almost all the people that were in that episode, aside from Glenn, don't have a network anymore. They all was like, it's enough. So, Coach Dave says Rumble Studio versus, he also has voice form, seems to have editing, assembly potential. I did notice that when I went in to click on the mix button, it said, this is coming in the future. And I was like, ooh, because that was like one of the key things in the selling point. Like, you can assemble this. And I was like, next week, maybe. So I was like, that was kind of different, to say the least. But
as I think about this, I do like this idea if you could seamlessly, because there's some folks you just couldn't pin down for an hour or to do an interview. And if you could have a series of questions and just go back and forth, let them record their answers, then stitch that together. That's interesting.
Well, the other thing, because when I was playing with it, they said, if you'd like to see what it's like on the customer side, click here. So I went over, and it was a thing for podcasters. And what I found is, I think probably 2 out of 10 questions, I re-recorded the answer. Like, I got done and I was like, I can do better than that. And I was like, I could see where it might lead to better answers, because it's not like Jeopardy. I mean, typically you ask somebody a question. So what did it feel like when you did the blah? And they go, well, it was such and such, and blah. And you go, great, next question. Where if you give the guest multiple tries to get their perfect answer, you might end up with better content. So it's like I said, there was part of me at first that I was like, not sure about this. And then I was like, and there's only one way to find. So like I say, right now I'm using it on the question of the month, which isn't really kind of what they're talking about. That's one question, but I might play with it in the future. It could be fun. So we'll see. But Daniel was talking about networks. V says, I recommend the network episode so often that I made a text expander snippet for. Yeah. It's the thing with networks, because that is now, I always go out to the Facebook groups, and that's the question I saw 3 times.
Really?
People
are still asking that question? Because I thought it was dying down.
Yeah, I'm thinking of joining a network. What should I think about it? And I was like, well, and to me, the best line on that is Eric Newsom. The book is Make Noise, and in his newsletter once he approached this subject and said, so many people think if I join a network, they can make me big. And he goes, networks don't make shows big. They make big shows bigger. And I went, oh, that's true. That's really, it's a little bit like the music biz, right? You're trying to get a manager because you're this small little band, and you can't get a manager until you have something to manage. So it's that kind of thing. And I always just tell people, be very, very careful if they make you change your feed, because you better get it in writing that, if you leave, they'll change it back. Who owns the content when you're on the network? Do they own your content that you did before you were on the network? There's all sorts of, it sounds great, and we're going to cross promote, and we're going to get advertisers, and that's all the beautiful side of it. But like, you need to look at what happens if things go wrong kind of side of that. Cause, as I just said, there are a few networks I know of. The one, Trek.fm, was run by, I forget the guy's name. I interviewed him, and he's been a magazine editor, and he's got this huge background. And it just, every time I hear kind of the behind the scenes of a network, it's a lot of, in some ways, babysitting. And, it's like a band in a way. You've got a bunch of performers that all want the spotlight. And as a network, you get to choose where that spotlight goes in some cases. And that just could get kind of, and I'm always like, I like the Daniel J. Lewis, Ray Ortega, Dave Jackson network, which was, we used to just talk about each other's stuff on a regular bit without any prompting. I was like, oh, I was listening to Daniel. I mean, today I talked about the new media show. I was listening to Todd, and he said that. So you could set up something with similar shows and just say, hey, this week, everybody promote Jim. All right, next week, everybody promote Uncle Marv. This week, promote whoever. And just, it doesn't have to be, it could be a, 15-second promo, 30-second promo. It could just be a shout out. It could, whatever. Because a lot of times I think that's what people want from a network is I just need more promotion, and they have my target audience as well. Yeah. So
it's a lot of work. The whole network thing's a lot of work, and I'm not sure a whole lot of payoff. You got to get the motivations lined up correctly. Got to get everybody on doing the right things for the right reasons. I got contacted by one of these, virtual admins wanting to know if we could do a promo swap with Mac Geek Gab. I think that's the name of the podcast. And I was like, I don't really do that, but would they consider just being on the show? Like, that seems like a pretty good, seems like a pretty good swap. Like, and so, we've been going back and forth over the last week or two, and we're going to meet on Monday to talk about it. But I think that's a much better way about approaching those kinds of partnerships instead of trying to listen. And some networks have worked. If you want to put them together, that's fine. I just think they're a lot more work than they're worth unless you get them. You get a single person to kind of administrate it and make sure everything's being done fair, and then you've got very clear agreements between everybody to make sure that part works. The Horse Radio Network, right? Glenn runs that. Like, yes, it's a network, but Glenn runs it, right? And so it works because it's in his best interest to make sure that works for all his hosts. And we've heard him talking about it. He is really good about taking care of his hosts. So he's getting the motivation lined up in the right place. Yeah. And I'm surprised. I kind of thought the network days had kind of come and gone.
And people don't think about it. If I remember right, Glenn pays people per episode. Like, that's it. Mm-hmm. And because if you get, if you say, okay, we get X amount of money per month from sponsors and everything else, and then we'll just divide it up. Now you've got to go in and count the number of downloads per episode, and then figure out, okay, so, Jim was on 47% of the downloads. Sharon was on 13, and then Jim or Steve was on that one. Remember, he was a guest, so he's got 1.6%. Yeah. It turns into a math nightmare.
Put it in Otter. Let's take it one step even farther. Put it in Otter, and it gives you a percentage. You're like, okay, we're gonna pay you. Could you imagine that motivation if you paid the host for the number of words? They would be stepping all over each other. It would be in what
Yeah.
that'd be a nightmare. I
Well,
think per show, and then probably review it every 6 months, type deal to be, you got to have some kind of metrics because you want to encourage people to do certain behaviors to get paid more, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like when you get paid per word, it just at that point. No.
Could you imagine the keyword stuffing if you got paid for that? The keyword stuffing that you would.
You mean that
would
show
do.
where Pamela Anderson was naked?
That
and then
one.
Pamela
that
Anderson
one.
was naked, and then yeah.
Is that still trending? That can't be a
No.
trending thing anymore. There's got to be something new.
Here's now. Do we take a 10-second tangent? I'm confused.
Yeah.
I still occasionally go to yahoo.com just for the train wreck that is yahoo.com.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this is, right, we need to respect women for their minds and their contributions. And yet every article about a female on Yahoo is Donna D'Erico, former wife of Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue and Playboy Playmate, wore a bikini at age 54. Holy cow, is that allowed? And I was like, and then it's like, I forget the British. She was in, anyway, a bunch, especially if you're 40 to 50 years old, Christy Brinkley, they're all bikini shots. And I was like, I don't understand the conflict. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So,
okay. But coming off that to podcasting, that is, if you ever want to see a purely MSN is by this way, the Microsoft site, the MSN network, same exact thing. If you ever want to see a really bad example of clickbait, like all those, the feeds inside Facebook or Facebook on their app, they have a news feed, similar kind of thing. Like you can just tell every headline's been optimized for clicking, right? And they're all clickbait heavy. And listen, I know we do this as podcasters, right? I know that's what we do, but it's just painful to see the worst examples of these things.
What's fun is in the States, and which is hilarious because I can't remember the channel it's on, but it's Shark Week on
Discovery,
whatever
I think it's
Discovery Channel.
Yeah,
and I don't know why, but when I turn on YouTube TV, it goes to Shark Week, and it's hilarious listening to them. Like, there have been more people on the moon than more people who have been this deep in the ocean. And I was like, oh, and everything's like, the whatever yellow tiger shark has never bitten a human until now. It's like everything is just this huge clickbaity. Sharks are going to knock at your door, and land shark. And for those who remember the 70s, and eat you. But I kind of laugh at just how good they are at the titles. And then they went into the weird Mike Phelps versus shark. Which one's faster? And then apparently at one point Mike Tyson got in a fight with a shark. I'm trying to see that.
Punched in the nose.
Come here, Mr. Shark. I'm gonna punch you in the mouth. I was like,
but it's yeah.
But on the other thing, it's a thing. Shark Week is, there's a well-crafted campaign that, it's
listen, and it's not just
it works. I said Shark Week, and you said, oh, Discovery.
No, right on. I was reading a little bit of news this morning, and it was like the headline was like, a meteor the size of Manhattan headed towards the Earth, right? And you go, so then you're like, really? So you click into it. It's going to make a near Earth pass at 4.3 million miles away, and you're like, okay, so Craig, what does Craig say?
Craig says, if you have a dog named Shark, don't take it to the beach.
Oh,
that's hilarious.
It's where we're at. This is for podcasters. The question I think you have to ask yourself: are you going to participate in this clickbait? Like, we all know Google has prioritized headlines for sure. Like, that's the last thing left. That's one of the few things they're coming off of now. We've gamed everything else, so now we're gaming titles. What happens when they stop allowing titles? What are they gonna use? Right? I mean, everybody's gaming this.
Well, you made a great point. Is how many times do you click on a clickbaity title that I remember one, it was like, watch video of this person getting attacked by a shark. And I was like, oh, I'm down for that. And I go over, no video. And everybody in the comments is like, where's the frickin' video? There's a blah, blah, blah. So if you clickbait too much and there's no payoff, it's the boy that cried wolf. They're going to quit clicking on your title and, that whole 9 yards. So you got to be careful with it.
This is where being a trusted media source as a podcaster, and I think podcasters are media, this is where being trusted wins, because as people get sick of this, they'll continually come back to your RSS feed or come back to your feed, wherever that's at, maybe Spotify. And, because they know they're going to get good content from you. I think I'd be a little hesitant to use that clickbait like tactics on your own site, like to give in. All right, I'm just going to create some content that's clickbait just to get folks on my site. I would be really hesitant about giving in to that as a podcaster, mixing that in with your current stuff to see if you can get some folks to come in. It's just not, I don't know. It's got to come to a head at some point because titles are just awful now. Like they really, I'm kind of waiting for a total misrepresentation in the title being an okay thing. Today it's questionable. When do we get to the point when it's just an outright lie and it brings you in? And I'm sure there's some of those out there, but certainly don't, as podcasters, don't do that. Like, don't ruin your integrity on that.
Well, I still use it. There's a tool from CoSchedule that helps you make headlines. And what's really cool is you go in here and like here, I got an 81% on this one. How to record a great podcast trailer that energizes your audience. And it kind of says, oh, you need more of these words or more of that kind of word and things like that. But there are times as I'm playing with this that like it loves lists, 7 ways to, smack your mic, et cetera, et cetera. and so I kind of like this tool because it's supposed to be based on SEO. And, you can see here where I started off with how to record an ear-pleasing podcast trailer. No. Did I really type that? How to record? And that's my problem is you end up writing for a computer and not a human. Yeah. And so you have to be kind of careful with some of that stuff. But it's the reason I like that tool is it does kind of teach you like this could be better if you added these words or that word. And I'm like, So I did want to switch gears a little bit because Ken Blanchard brought up Spoon, his puppet show that is he's in the process of creating and putting out on YouTube. If you're looking for a great source of dad jokes or kid-friendly stuff, Alexa, I just said the magic word, tell me a joke. And she will say, okay, good. She must have heard me say stop or whatever. But the woman in the tube from Amazon is great. I know this morning I have one with a video in front of me and it said, ask me a question or ask me to tell you a joke about chickens. So I was like, all right, tell me a joke about chickens. And she was like, why did the chef chase out all the chickens from the kitchen? There were too many clucks in the kitchen. It was some total dad, like a kid would laugh. And I was just thinking if Ken's looking for, I don't know how that works copyright wise. You know what I mean? Like, if it's an Alexa joke, is that, I don't know how that works, but
public domain, most of those got to be public domain, right? You think,
but I know when my great nieces and nephews were little, I bought one for my niece and she's like, this is like the best toy ever. They just ask her jokes and questions all day long. And so if you're trying to get into the mindset of a kid, she might be, a source. I don't know that, or just Google dad jokes, but, or just follow, Jared Easley is like the worst of like grown worthy dad jokes.
It's all in the delivery. It's all in the delivery.
But, speaking of things that don't make me groan, we might as well take this time to say thanks to our awesome supporters. You can be an awesome supporter over at askthepodcastcoach.com/support. And just because I forgot to change the slides, we will again say thank you and best of luck to all you do, to James at the Podcast Network. If you go over to dogpodcastnetwork.com, he's got all sorts of shows for you. And if you'd like to be the teacher's pet, go over to Podcast Coach. Podcast Coach. Go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/support, and there'll be a link to that. Ask the Podcast Coach runs on Podpage. If you'd like to try Podpage, check it out at, what happened? Is it not on a loop? All right, I guess it's not on. We're going around again. Check out trypodpage.com. If you want to learn Podpage, go over to learnpodpage.com. And of course, if you need more Jim Collison, check him out over at theaverageguy.tv, and that's where you'll find the home of Home Gadget Geeks. If you're thinking of starting a podcast, well, when you think podcasting, think School of Podcasting. And again, thanks to all of our awesome supporters. You can become an awesome supporter at askthepodcastcoach.com/support. And now's the time my sprockets wenn me dance. That's not a good ending. That's abrupt.
It's good enough. It was good. That stuff makes me happy. That song. Some happiness.
Yeah. That's it. Coach Dave says Uncle Marv, that darn Rodecaster Pro 2, I upgraded. I got to give, if nothing else, the way that Rode updates this thing, a little message comes up and says, hey, there's a new version of your firmware. Do you want to upgrade? And you go, yes. And then it says, okay, I downloaded your firmware. Do you want me to install it? And you go, yes. And that's it. So I'm now running 1.07, which in theory, I don't want to test it now. We will in the future sometime. But one of my biggest gripes was if I wanted to play Jim a clip from my computer, I couldn't because I have it set to have a mix minus thing with Jim and I, so he can't hear himself coming back to him. And in theory, I could turn that off and play you a sound on my computer now. So that's the big thing I saw that they added in the latest one. And it's kind of interesting. The thing I hate is every morning, and I mean every morning when I turn this thing on, it resets my sound to Rodecaster 2 main. And I use Rodecaster 2 chat. So I'll just be sitting here and I'll start some YouTube video or something, and all this is, I'm like, oh, there's no audio. And I'm like, oh, hold on. Right click, sound settings, chat, and okay. And I was like, if they could fix that, that would be great. But again, it's kind of a new unit, and they are updating it. That's the good news. I just wish they would quit it to do that. And then I cannot, when you star a quote, how do I go back to see the quoted things? Because there was one from Stefan had a question, and I thought I started.
Oh, I unstarted. I thought you covered it. Sorry. My bad.
That's all right. But he had asked about, what do you see in Spotify? So this is actually, I'm doing a talk at Podcast Movement on this, which is there are additional stats in places like Spotify, in Google, in Apple. And so this is the Podcast Rodeo Show. I'm looking at it and you go to podcasters.spotify.com. So I can see how many starts, how many streams, how many listeners, and I get a little blurry on streams and listeners. I understand. I think streams is how many times. See, I thought that's what starts were. One is how many times people click. Listens are how many times they listen to at least more than 1 or 1 minute. And then followers are kind of like, well, followers. And you can see how many people listen to whatever episode. And if I remember right, if I go into you can see how far people listen. So you can see, which is hilarious because this is 1 minute and 35 seconds and I still lost 50% of my audience. So I guess about halfway through when I say, hey, I'm taking a hiatus because I have COVID, they said, okay, that's enough of that. And that's all they needed. But so there are additional stats. And then somewhere in here, I thought I could see, here's Ask the Podcast Coach. I thought I could see like who my audience is. And that might be I know it's somewhere in here because I remember laughing because I was like, wait, they like Ed Sheeran? Oh, here it is. Audience for Ask the Podcast Coach. Followers, gender. So 58% male, 42% female. the biggest age group, 38 to 44, followed by 18 to 22, and then 45 to 59. And they like to listen to Brian Vander Ark, Damn Tall Buildings, The Verve Pipe, Blackberry Smoke, and Jay-Z. So there's a wide view of music, and then primarily in the United States, followed by Australia and South Africa. So that's the kind of stuff you can get in Spotify. And again, you just go to podcasters.spotify.com. So, but yeah. And then he says, Pod Events by Podnews. Yes, great site. Go there. So, and then he also asked about the Mixcast. The thing I forgot about the Mixcast 4, because Bandrew over at Podcastage reminded me, the Mixcast 4 still does the thing where after, I want to say 35 minutes, because they're doing the polywave thing, it splits your show into multiple pieces that you then have to pieces part back together. And I went, oh yeah, that's another reason why I'm not using that. So that's, and again, they're all updating and adding new stuff and that whole 9 yards. So, you know, it is what it is. So, and Spoon says podnews.net. That is James Cridlin. James Cridlin is a guy, he's an old radio guy. So, he's got plenty. He actually played a tape of him when he was a DJ on the BBC, because he's from Britain. And, it was hilarious because you don't realize, you know, we all remember when we were 13, if you're a male, you know, when you're all of a sudden you started talking like nobody likes a Charlie in the box, right? Your voice is cracking all the time, but your voice still changes. When I listened to me in 2005, my voice is higher, definitely higher. And I don't know if that's being more relaxed or what, but James Cridlin's voice was very high when he was on the BBC. But podnews.net, I have, speaking of the woman in the tube, part of my, what's the morning routine? What's it called? Flash briefing. He's part of my flash briefing. It tells me the weather in Akron, and then it goes to some sort of like the Bible scripture of the day, and then it goes to James Cridlin. And James basically gives the headlines of the news that he puts out as a newsletter. So I get his newsletter, but his little audio thing lets me know if I want to go read that article or not. And he gives you enough to where you get the gist of the article, but if you want to do a deeper dive, you could do that.
Is that newsletter sponsored? Is that what he...
Oh, have you never seen it? Go to his website, Podnews.
I hear about it. I don't need to read it. I hear about it from every podcast I listen to.
That's true.
About podcasting. Everybody.
Here's the thing. He put people out of business. There were a bunch of people doing kind of, you know, newsletters about podcasts, and James had been doing one for radio and came in, and no offense to anybody that was doing one, just spanked them. Like, not only was he better, it was like, holy cow, because James gets he's connected with all sorts of people all over the country. And so you can see at the bottom here, he has readers and supporters, and he's got gold supporters, silver supporters, and yeah, there's me down here. I'm a silver supporter, and then I think that's it. And these all have links. I somewhere in here, I probably track that, but it's, so you can see here, like there was they found a tape of Robin Williams, and I didn't realize this. Robin Williams apparently owned stock in Audible and started a audio program back in 2000 where he would do small audio programs that were then delivered via an app. And if you had, apparently Audible at one point had their own little iPod, and you could plug it in and it would sync. So it smelled like a podcast. It looked like a podcast. It sounded like a podcast, but there was no RSS. So that's where, again, you know, people are going to die on that hill if they want to, but it's, how
does he, if he's supported by the industry, if you go down to right, you know, so Podbean and, you know, right. How do you be objective in that sense?
Well,
I'm not saying he's not, by the way, but just how do you be objective?
I forget the company. Oh, there was a company he did because he's also very geeky. Like, he's a code writing geek, and he set up a thing to monitor who sends the most spam messages. And we all thought it was Acast. And it turns out it's not Acast. It was another company. And he kind of joked and he said, oh, I forget the name of it. But he's like, and actually, this company sent me X amount of emails in X amount of time. And he goes, and I noticed as of this morning, because apparently he notified them that, hey, congratulations, you're the biggest spammer. And they pulled their sponsorship.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I guess you run that risk. It's diversified, right? I mean, his support is diversified. So if you do, I know Lipson is in there. So say you run something and you piss off Lipson and they drop you. Well, okay, that's the right thing. It's just, this is a hard space to be in, especially with media and news, because the only money, I'd love to think value for value is a model that works, but it just doesn't. It doesn't work because people are cheap. Individuals are cheap, right? They just will not. And listen, there's always an exception. There's maybe a 2% exception of those that support people on Patreon and do some of the things, but far and above, that's a model that just doesn't necessarily work for most of the people. So you're in a tough spot. I mean, newspapers were in the same spot, right? I mean, they had advertisers and I'm not, by the way, I'm not trying to bust on James at this point. I just think it's some questions that people ask.
Well,
right.
I mean, we could put on our tinfoil hat. If you look at the mainstream news, they're not doing many stories about the downside of any medication, because every other ad is ask your doctor if Nogedashia is good for you. And then that's 30 seconds of like may cause a third nipple and death and explosive diarrhea and all this other stuff. And you're like, what? And then, so another site here that's using a similar kind of thing is, Brian Barletta at Sounds Profitable, which is kind of under the Podnews. This is all about podcast monetization and primarily advertising. He does a lot of stuff on programmatic and things like that. And then I think it's Pod Events. Or is it Pod.events? There's a one that James does. And I started to set up one, and James already had his. And I was just like, I'm not going to even attempt. Let's just have one. So yeah, you can see here's a webinar in the introduction to podcast, sound design for podcasters, how to use a workshop week to increase your sales, leveling up your podcast. So there are a lot of events, and a lot of these obviously are online. Be sure to check who you're getting your information from. And I always sound like sour grapes when I say this, but there was a case this week where somebody uploaded M4As to their media host and then said, hey, it's not showing in Spotify because Spotify only uses MP3s. So consequently, they were told, yeah, Spotify only accepts MP3s. So their podcast guru renamed the M4A file MP3 and re-uploaded it. And I was like, yep, there's a class A. That's the, just because there's a mouse in the cookie jar doesn't mean it's a mouse, or it doesn't mean it's a cookie. And so, it's one of those things where, be careful where you get your information from. I guess in some cases.
Who holds James Cridlin accountable?
He does get pushback on occasion, and
does he have a board? Does he have a board? Do you know? I'm not trying to hammer James Cridlin. I'm just like, who holds him accountable? He should have a board if he doesn't. I don't know if he does. Here's the
question. Who is the other partner of Podnews? Because on occasion when James talks about Podnews, he will say, I would have to ask my partner. And I'm like, oh, I wonder who else is in the Podnews thing. I don't know.
You can see now I'm just trying to get us mentioned in Podnews next week. Collison says James Cridlin is not accountable to anyone.
That is, and there are other podcasts. I mean, Podcast Movement has a newsletter. Sky Pillsbury, which is, I still say, some sort of like the coolest spy name ever. You know what I mean? It's like, I know who we need to bring in for the job. Who? Sky Pillsbury. And that's her name. She does a podcast. I'm trying to think who else does it. There's a guy in New York. There's like 5 or 6 newsletters about podcasting. But because when James came in, he had a much more global, like he's talking about podcasting in Brazil and, Malaysia and all these other places. We're like, huh? You mean there are podcasters outside of the U.S.? Said the stupid white, middle-aged white podcaster guy, right? Besides Craig, I mean, we all know Craig, but other than that, like, huh? Yeah. So he just kind of came in and a lot of people, much like when Apple came in. Like when Apple came in, Yahoo used to have a directory. There was the Zune directory. There was, I forget what turned into Audible. No, I forget what Twitter was before it was
OTO.
Like that? Yeah, that's
Audio.
Yeah.
Audio.
That went away. So when James came on board, everybody saw it and was like, "Yeah, I can't compete with that," and off they went. So, yeah, it's that's a good question, because. And I will say
it's a lot of power. That's a lot of power consolidated into one person.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to piss off James Cridlin. That's the point. I think that you go, But I'm trying to think if I'm he's the only time. And I had a discussion with him about this once. Is because it's there are people at Libsyn. There's a person at Libsyn, let's go that right, that don't quite get along with James, and it's fairly public, and they're civil. Let's go that route. They're civil to each other. But there was a time when I thought James was a little biased towards Libsyn, and I kind of mentioned this to him, and I said there was one time where Libsyn rolled out a thing where it used to be you had to ask us to put in like a redirect, like if you were going to use like PodTrack or something like that. So we added it to where the customer who had said, "Hey, any chance I can put in the redirect?" So we added it, and we're like, cool. And then James reported on it and then said, "Oh, by the way, you still can't redirect to pod sites." And I go, dude, like, how come you always got to spin things negative? And we had a little conversation on Skype, and he was like, "You know what? That's okay. I see your point." And since then, he hasn't been overly praiseful, and like every time, like right now, well, this week Libsyn did not have a good. We could talk about that. Libsyn did not have a good week. We were down for hours, and here's the thing: we always talk about if you take a break, be sure to communicate it, and it goes over much smoother. I got to give credit to. I know I work there, but the thing that made what was a really bad day not so bad. Because all your files kept downloading, that worked. You just couldn't log into Libsyn to do more stuff. And the minute, because I sat there and watched it, like first I saw somebody go, "Hey, you can't log into Libsyn 4," and then literally like 10 seconds later goes, "or 5," and instantly like all hands on deck. This is not a drill. This is kind of thing. And we just started communicating on. If you go to status.libsyn.com, and if you look at that, you can see all the updates. And what was weird is once we got everything up, the next day I come to work and I'm expecting to hear just seeing a flaming inbox. And it was weird because it was actually the opposite. We had people that were like, "Hey, you guys had a bad day yesterday, but I wanted to thank you for keeping me in the loop. And, we didn't lose anything. And I understand stats are going to be a little delayed, but they're coming back." But so the communication during a bad time, actually, in some cases, like one guy's like, "I'm a Libsyn customer for life." That was like amazing. Like that was the most amazing bad day I've ever seen. It sounds weird, but it's one of those things where, if something is not going right, just communicate with your audience, and they appreciate it. Because if you don't communicate, they're going to assume the worst. If we hadn't said, "Hey, we are aware you can't log in," yada yada yada. People are like, "What's going on? Did they blow up? Is their building on fire?" So
are they going out of business? It's been sold.
Yeah, They got bought by Spotify. Oh my God. Yeah. So
it's the end of the world.
yeah. So again, kind of tying it back to, yeah, but what does that have to do with podcasting? If you are going to take a break, which to your listener is not great news, it's much better if you explain like when you'll be back, if you know when. And I mean, I listened to a daily show, and he'd been doing a daily show for the better part of about a year and a half, and just said, hey, my kids are getting older and I'm missing out on some of the times, and it's dawning on me that my kids are only going to be around for a little bit. And so I'm going to take a break. And, it was kind of like, oh, I'll have to find something else to listen to now in the he was my shower podcast. And, but who can like get mad for a father wanting to spend time with his kids?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like, you kind of go, well, good for you. I'm glad to hear that you're not ignoring your kid. So, so just communicate that stuff and, you'll be good. So, Coach Dave no, I don't think that's going to work. Coach Dave wants a lifetime Libsyn membership for $48. I don't know that we can pay all the developers for that one-time fee. Oh, wait a minute. We have breaking news. I don't have any breaking news sound effects, but I do have applause. According to the one of what's the word? A trusted source says that in September, the Audacity to Podcast is coming back in September. Well, I'm glad to hear that because, there's only one Daniel J. Lewis, doggone it. And it's we need somebody. I always appreciated Daniel's deep dives and his, again, you just have your own personality and flavor and
attention to detail.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's find, here's a question. This was from Tim out in a Facebook group. And it's one of those things. Jim, do you have a media kit?
No.
I guess because you're not really looking for sponsors, right?
No, not really.
He says, I was recently asked if my podcast had a media kit for advertisers. Does anyone have a media kit that I could take a look at? Thanks in advance. Have a great weekend. Well, number one, if you're using Captivate, they have a one-click media kit. If you're using Blueberry, it's actually pretty cool. They have a media kit, but they've tied it into a survey that you can send out to your audience. So that whole demographic, male, female kind of stuff will be in there, but it'll pull in your stats. So you can see like average number. I think average numbers in there of downloads per episode and things like that. And if you don't work for somebody, like if you don't use those for a host, then just go in and take a screenshot of your stats. They're usually looking for, so put your sponsor hat on. They're trying to figure out, do you have my target audience? So they're going to want to know male, female, age. A lot of times they'll ask for college education or education in general. And then they're going to want to know downloads. And this is one time where reviews come in handy because you can take screenshots of those and put them in your media kit. So if you don't have a media kit, you can make one fairly easy. And I know anytime I've ever been asked for one, I just go make one. It takes, copy paste, and a couple screenshots in a Google Doc and you're off to the races. So, and again, I know we mentioned this last week. If you're doing advertising, do it's the old sales trick of what day should I call you, Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday? Because you're not giving them an option of not calling you. So you go, okay, what would you like to sponsor? Just the episodes? Do you want a link in the description, or do you want a link in the newsletter as well? Oh, by the way, I have a package for all three, yada, yada, yada. So
yeah, but make sure you're doing that. That should be the second or third email, not the first. I can't tell you how many emails I get on LinkedIn now of people like, hey, I know, we just connected. Great to meet you. I'd like to set up a 15-minute call. Will Monday work? Like, little early. Like, how about we chat a little bit and make sure there's something. You don't even know what I do or who I am for the most part. So I am not a big fan of that technique to use in the first interaction, Dave, but I totally agree. I think when you're trying to make those kind of connections with people and that the permission has been given to set something up, I think it's really smart at that point to say, hey, Monday, Tuesday, or Friday are open. Or, a lot of folks use scheduling apps, and that's kind of revolutionizing this getting connected, where send me the link to your calendar app. and I'll find a spot that works for both of us. So I think that's the time to ask. I just get too many too early. Like, we didn't even meet and you're already asking me to meet. Like, I don't want to talk to you. Give me a reason.
Yeah, it's always amazing how that happens. It's like going on a first date and like, hi, I'm Dave.
You want to get married?
Let's go. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You want to give me all your money? And you're like, whoa.
What I've been doing for bad pitches is I've been saying I only accept pitches on Volley, which is that little app I love to use to communicate with people. And so far have received 0 pitches on Volley. Because I'm like, I'd like to get to know you better. Click here to connect with me on Volley. And which again proves that they're not really interested in really being on my show. They're just, it's a, mass email and that whole 9 yards. So that'll be, that's always fun. But yeah, I my favorite on LinkedIn is you see this, so-and-so wants to connect with you on LinkedIn and you say, okay. And like immediately some robot is like, hey, thanks for connecting, buy my book. And you're like, really? Does that work? Like, are you kidding me that like the minute I connect with you, you're pitching me? I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So, Jack in a Round Show says, hey, where do you find all the reviews? Chartable tells me 70, but I can only access 1. Well, that, my friends, is from our good friend Daniel J. Lewis at My Podcast Reviews. Go to schoolofpodcasting.com/MPR. That's short for My Podcast Reviews, and that gives you all of the reviews from all the countries. And what's great is you can share them. That also gives you a link in My Podcast Reviews that you can give out that much like Glow and Supercast, where it's one link and then it kind of figures out what phone you're on and says, oh, you're on an Android phone. Here's Google Podcasts and Spotify and whatever. If you're on an iPhone, like here's Apple Podcasts and Overcast. Schoolofpodcasting.com/MPR will get you there. So let's see here. Going back to the Rumble conversation that we started earlier today. I might be willing to try self-service podcast option, use my Rumble Studio to craft a generic framework and give small business owners a chance to make their own show using my format. It's an interesting thing. If you think about it, like one of the, I haven't heard as much about him in a while because, well, he's got more money than God and kind of retired. He still does a show, is John Lee Dumas. And we all kind of poked fun that John had kind of the same 6 questions, and it didn't dawn on me till years after I listened to his show. He was walking people through the hero's journey. He was like, why did you get into this? What was your biggest hurdle? What was your aha moment? What, made you turn the corner or whatever and things like that. So yeah, you could do something like that. Give it, again, give it a shot, see what it turns out like. Let the first people know, or find some people to be your guinea pigs. That's, I didn't make the video this week, but I wanted to, is don't make your first recording or first of anything be the first. I don't think it's on my desk anymore. I went outside last week to the Soapbox Derby was in town in Akron, Ohio, and I used the Tascam DR10, which is not on my desk, which is this little handheld recorder. And I had never used it outside. So the first time I used it outside was the first time that was a real interview. So I had my Rode Reporter gizmo, and it turns out that the DR10 recorder it's backlit. And when you're in really bright sunlight, that means you can't see crap. So consequently, what I ended up doing was going in the bathroom. I had a brand new battery in it. And the other thing I hate about it, I still can't believe it's not right. I mean, I have this here, but I don't have the other one. But it has buttons on it, but to get it to record, there's a slide switch on the side. And man, I want to find somebody at Tascam and go, give me a record button. But you slide it to start it, and I just held the microphone, and it was just on. And I just walked around and interviewed people because I put it on auto level. I told it to take out the lower end of the recording because it was kind of windy outside, and recorded, and it was fine. But it was one of those where it was just one of those where I was like, oh, I didn't follow my own advice. The first time I'm doing something is the first time I'm doing something for real. I should have, gone outside and tested this. And I hear people do this all the time, like, oh, well, wish me luck. I'm using Squadcast for the first time. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, you interviewing your cousin or somebody. They're like, no, it's a real interview. And I'm like, no, don't make the first time you do something like be for real. You want to do a couple test things. And so
get out there, try to get into the situation, get into the environment. It's like going to a conference and you're thinking you're going to get this clean audio, and you have a microphone that is a condenser mic, and you're literally picking up the entire room, as opposed to using a dynamic mic that's really focused on the person right in that setting. So yeah, it's a good idea to kind of know your equipment. Like, don't buy it new. Buy it new a couple of weeks ahead of the event that you're going to do, for sure.
And just for Ken, John Lee Dumas didn't really retire. He still does, I think, a daily show. I just don't.
Yeah, he's doing a daily.
Yeah, he's still doing a daily show. I don't hear, and I'm sure it's still a great show. I just don't hear people talk about John as much as they used to. And I know he's like in Puerto Rico because he made so much money. He needed a way to get out of paying taxes, basically. He's a great guy. The thing about John Lee Dumas that I like is when you hear John, and he is so stoked to meet you, and what's up, and I am a high energy guy. When you talk to John Lee Dumas, this is how he talks. And I was like, holy cow. So Coach Dave, Squadcast versus Riverside. I know plenty of people that use Riverside and love it. I know more people that are saying, how do I get off this thing? Now, the bad news is Squadcast just came out with a new version, and I'm hearing people, and I'm not sure they're complaining about it not working or the fact that the interface is new. They just come out with a new interface. But I've had one problem in like 6 years with Squadcast, and even with that, they were still able to give me a file to use. So I often use Squadcast as my backup. Here's a fun question that we can all argue over. Jack and Round Show just spent $50. Thank you for the podcast review show suggestion. That's a great service. I love it. Now help me spend more money. Best audio editing software. I edit in Adobe Premiere, but anything with AI. But anything with, so you're looking for something with AI. Is that the thought?
Yes. No, that's what they're trying to say.
I don't know anything with AI. I mean, I had a meeting yesterday.
Have you tried Descript? I mean, that's the, I think that's the closest you're going to get in the mainstream.
Yeah. Trust me, in about, I'm going to say 6 to 8 months, I will probably still be using Hindenburg. I met with Descript yesterday. I said, can you kind of get me over a couple hurdles here? And that stuff is Descript does so much. I didn't realize there's effects in Descript, all sorts of crazy stuff. And now they're rolling out. It's not there now, but the video stuff that I saw is pretty cool. And so I will probably quit paying for Camtasia because that's $300. Now granted, Descript is $30 a month. That's $300 anyway. But if I could quit paying for, and trust, I mean, I love Hindenburg, but it's the only, and that's where they were kind of excited. They said, we heard through the grapevine that Dave, you might make a Descript course. And I'm like, oh, I'm absolutely making a Descript course. And they're like, I said, and that's to your credit, because I had members of the School of Podcasting that said, hey, Dave, we appreciate your Adobe course and your Hindenburg course and your Audacity course. Like, where's the Descript course? And I was like, what do you mean Descript? And they went, oh, you haven't played with it. And I had played with it. I told them, I on the call, I made them laugh. I said, I remember when I saw Descript for the first time at Podcast Movement, and I said, oh, this is never going to work. I said, and now I'm sitting here going, holy cow, that's amazing. So,
Descript does have a free kind of a freemium, so to speak. You can get in there and give it a run, try it out, put a short piece of audio in there and give that a try. But if your Descript is audio and video, right, at this point? So because they say that they do video as well. So take a short clip. This is one of those kinds of things. Take a short clip, move it in, test it out, see if it's what you like. Do some editing on it. Get a messy clip, and let it do its thing.
Yeah, I don't I mean, Daniel says, because Jack and Round is using Premiere because he also does video. He says in video, most of the AI development I see is related to image correction, special effects, and not the kind of editing for podcasts. Yeah, I mean, that would be like me editing audio in Camtasia. I could do it. Yeah, okay, but it's it's one of those, not quite completely painting with peanut butter, but maybe not the right tool for the job. And I'm not sure AI, aside from there's a thing in the script where
let's be careful what we call AI, because there's a lot of things being called AI right now that are not AI. So that it's just, it was like, years ago, we used to have business and
hold on.
And now, oh, he's been waiting for this. It's time for Jim to get his nerd on.
Okay.
Oh, thank you for that. Yes. Yeah. No, listen, in the industry, AI is just kind of caught on as this thing to say, and it sounds super cool. There's very few, oh, got full screen. There are very few who are actually using it or getting it right. So you kind of want to, don't get too caught up in the AI hype that's out there. It's got some AI has some really specialized usage. And if they're, it's like image correction kind of stuff. And they're like, we correct it with AI. Probably not. So that's just, I get a little leery of everything having AI in it, and you're like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. DaVinci Resolve is a free video. They have a paid video, but I was getting ready to learn DaVinci Resolve, and I'm like, nope, my audience is going to appreciate the video side of Descript. But the other thing with AI, I've been paying for probably a year an AI tool that can help me write stuff, and every time I used it, it would bring in facts that I then had to fact check. And most of the time they were true, but I can't put out an article. Yeah. And I was like, so I'm going through a phase where I'm deleting stuff that, like, it's cool. I know Daniel used it. It's Jasper or something like that.
Jasper. Yep.
And
formerly known as,
that thing that Iron
the one
Man
from
had.
Iron Man. Yeah. Jarvis, formerly known as Jarvis.
Yeah. And so I'm just on them. I'm like, anytime I write something, it comes out of my head. And so I don't really need, I think an AI inspired writer would be great for somebody who was having a hard time writing. And I know it uses NLP, which is natural language processing. Daniel says, yeah, his Jasper subscription is coming up for renewal and he's thinking about cancel, but every time I use it, it feels totally worth it. Yeah. Maybe I just need to use it more.
You got to get in. I think you got to get in a quick writing mode. So get some ideas, put them down, and then start going into those ideas and letting it expand some things out for you. That's where it's really good. And then listen, you still got to go in there and edit. And they have a brand new feature where it'll create an entire paragraph for you. But Dave, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. This is not you still got to do the work of an editor with Jasper.
Yeah.
So don't think you're going in and it's going to write a book for you, and in an afternoon you're going to have a whole book. And you do got to fact check the correct, especially if you're doing technical stuff. You better fact check it for sure, because it's just it literally doesn't know. This is why I don't think it's AI. It literally doesn't know what's accurate and what's not. It's just going out and grabbing things and indexing things and then pulling that in for you. I do like they have a plagiarism checker in it, which is kind of cool. Allows you to kind of go out and say, hey, has this been written before? It's kind of interesting, because I wonder, like, you think about they're indexing a good chunk of the internet they should be. They have to, if they're going to check this thing fast against the internet to see if it's been written this way before. So you kind of wonder, I mean, the guys at archive.org are always begging for money. Maybe that's why Jasper is $100 a month, because it takes a lot of power and infrastructure to house all the writing on the internet.
That's true.
Yeah. Lastly, Daniel says it's a writing assistant. It's a writing assistant, not a writer.
Yeah.
It writes. Listen, it does write pretty well. Like if you're stuck, it's a good thing to get in there and get you unstuck and get you writing again. But you're gonna write and you're gonna edit for sure.
Yeah, and there are plenty. Now, I don't know if they're good, worse, better, but it seems like using, again, AI with NLP to write for you is about every 3 weeks on AppSumo. There's a new tool for that. And I don't know if it's better or worse or whatever, but the Jacking Around had one more question here, which is great because we're coming up on time. What is the best platform for analytics? You can go to school@podcasting.com/free classes, and there's one that says Understanding Media Hosts that compares Libsyn, Blueberry, Captivate, and and I'm missing one. There's a fourth one in there. And part of that is seeing what their stats look like. Realize almost all of them are going to give you the exact same thing. How many downloads? Where is your audience at geographically? What apps they use? Did it work on a like I know Blueberry breaks it down to is it on a PC or a phone? They all kind of do the same thing. Some of them have better interfaces. Like I know Red Circle, you have to wait for their stats to update. So you'd be like, show me my stats. And it's like spinning, which on one hand, if I was selling them, I'd be like, your stats are always up to date. Yeah, but I don't want to wait 20 seconds for them. There's that. But I always found Podbean stats a little like, it just seemed like I couldn't find what I was looking for. So part of it is the layout. And that's where I say it's kind of like, if I am driving across country, do I want to take my car, a Toyota Corolla, or do I want to take my brother's minivan that has 10,000 cup holders and it's made for long drives? Like they both get you there. One is a little better interface for the job. So they all kind of, do the same thing with, if I put on my Libsyn hat, Libsyn has stat codes where you can basically make a link and say, hey, how many people came from my newsletter? Or if I give this link to my guest, how many downloads did the guest give? You can actually also go into, which you can do on other platforms as well. But I love in Libsyn, you can go to the daily stats and there's like, you have this little peak and valley. You can click on the top of the peak and it'll break it out. Like here's where your downloads from, January 27th came from. And you're like, oh, well, 46 of them were my last episode. And then holy cow, look at all the people that listened to my old episodes. So that's always kind of fun to see. But Jim, what is coming up on Home Gadget Geeks this week?
Yeah, we spent a little time. I had a guest on who talked a little bit about whole or multi-room audio. So a little Wi-Fi speaker that you can purchase, not an assistant. Don't get confused. All it does is audio, but allows you. And today it's just iPhone. It's just an early version of this, but allows you to you set these things up on Wi-Fi and then you can stream audio to any place or all at the same time in the house. It's really cool. On a Kickstarter, it'll be available a little bit later there at homegadgetgeeks.com. Nice.
I do that with the woman in the tube from Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say, play a song, such and such, and then I named a group everywhere, which is kind of cool because I open up my bedroom door and my whole house is just blasting, Heaven and Hell by Black Sabbath or whatever it is I've asked. It's great.
Do you have any latency issues with that, or does it have any syncing problems hearing wise?
No, it's kind of cool because there's a little bit of there's lots of room echo because every room has so it's kind of cool. It's this cool kind of, I don't know, arena sounding audio. There's a little bit of slapback coming from, like you said, it's all in sync, but just the fact that I'm hearing it from the kitchen, which is all the way down the end of my
What's nice about this solution is I can on the fly turn them on and off. Like Alexa, if you got a song, if with the A Lady, if you've got a song playing, you've got to say it's a mess. This is a lot easier. So Home Gadget Geeks.
On the School of Podcasting, I'm very happy. I'm interviewing David Hooper today and Steve Stewart. So Dave Hooper will be on this week's episode talking about his book, which yesterday was free, the 101 tips or templates. Check and see if it's still there at Amazon. But thanks as always for coming out, and we'll see you next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach.